Hey, this is Dr. Tim Conley at Yeshiva University. Let's talk about pot, weed, grass, marijuana, a word that I've grown very familiar with over my career, but never quite learned how to spell. G, Mary, Huan, he. At any rate, cannabis sativa is historically one of the oldest and most widely used plants in the world. It is a source of various products, including THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. Be good to learn how to say that. THC is tetrahydrocannabinol. It's like LSD, with the hallucinogen lecture, lysergic acid diethylamide. Learn your THC, and there are a lot of myths and controversies concerning this drug. I'm primarily a clinician, a professor, but a long clinical history of treating people with addictive disorders and substance use disorders. So my perspective is uh, perhaps skewed by seeing people who developed a psychopathological relationship with this substance, usually concurrently with other substances. It wasn't just marijuana that was the issue. It was alcohol, it was anxiolytics, it was hallucinogens. There were people who were in a drug using subculture that included a lot of marijuana, often daily use. So I'll admit to a certain bias towards having seen clinical populations. If there are large numbers of marijuana users out there who are not suffering issues inherent in the diagnostic criteria for substance use disorder cannabis, then I don't see them. But THC was first isolated, THC as a chemical in the 1960s. Got to go with the 60s, about 1965, an important step. Eventually, researchers came to see there were more than 565 chemicals synthesized by the cannabis sativa plant. About 120 or so are called cannabinoids. It's got to do with the chemical structure. There have been many decades of complex pharmacological research done on these substances. Most of what concerned me was their addictive potential, so I'll spend a better part of my time here, not so much mucking through the pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic properties, but the behavioral, the implications of people using this substance on a pretty regular basis. There are medical uses for marijuana. That would be a whole separate lecture, I think. It has been approved. THC, cannabidol, has been approved to treat multiple sclerosis throughout much of the world. There are some neurodegenerative diseases, Parkinson's, etc., that people find the use of these substances effective for. Research is very varied. There is variations of THC in marijuana, hashish, hash oil, and sinsemillin. And the marijuana is usually smoked by various methods. You can roll it up into cigarettes called joints, and can hollow out a cigar and smoke it through the middle of a cigar, used in a water pipe, a bong. There's a whole culture out there. In fact, I'm giving this lecture from the state of Oregon, which is one of the first to legalize marijuana. There are currently more pot shops, I think, than there's more marijuana dispensaries. I'm sorry, not pot shops. More marijuana dispensaries than there are, I don't know, it seems anything else. Every little strip mall, every little corner seems to have one where people are selling it, and the cost has gone down, and the level of THC in the substances have gone up. This drug's been around for 12,000 years. Probably started in Central Asia, continues to flourish, continue to be grown there. There's a whole little bit of history in your textbook. Marijuana use by 12th, 10th, and 8th graders is pretty amazing that 23% of your 8th graders have tried marijuana. Let that sink in. Think, how old is an 8th grader? 13? 14? Probably 14. 23% of them have already used marijuana. Just think about that. That means the age of onset really is coming in about the 6th grade. That has implications for prevention, for use prevention. You could look at the work of Yifra Kaminer, Kaminer. Do a Google on him. He's developed a substantial body of literature concerning the impact of marijuana on the adolescent brain. It's not good. It's not a good idea actually to put any mind or mood altering substance on developing neuronal pathways, immature, those that are still growing. Um, the most severe thing we see is fetal alcohol effects. Don't put alcohol in a developing fetus. It results in all kinds of problems. You don't want to put cannabis on a developing adolescent brain either, or really any substance. You're going to induce a type of mental illness if you do. There has been a decline in use of synthetic opiates, but marijuana seems to be holding pretty steady. There is physiological dependence that can occur on this. Humans develop tolerance to both the cognitive and psychomotor effects of it. The tolerance doesn't seem to develop to the cognitive impairment observed in acute cannabis use in most measures of cognition. Impairments that do not exhibit tolerance include attention, learning, memory. Those don't get worse. You get a certain effect from the substance, but those continue to be present even when you use the same amount of substance. It's a very reliable kind of high. A cannabis withdrawal or abstinence syndrome is observed in human experimental studies. I want to reiterate that point. People will say marijuana is not addictive. It is, in fact, addictive because you develop withdrawal from it. One of the key diagnostic criteria is withdrawal, preceded by tolerance, generally a higher amount of the substance to get the same effect. Well, you don't see that so much with a lot of the marijuana effects, but you do see withdrawal, including insomnia, anorexia, anxiety, irritability, depression, even tremors. The characteristics of cannabis withdrawal are those of a true drug withdrawal syndrome. The predominant effects are behavioral and affective more than physical. But if you've seen somebody, and I've seen many, many, who are trying to stop smoking marijuana, interestingly, the book doesn't talk about craving, but it results in tremendous craving, as much as even nicotine withdrawal, which is probably the king of craving, as a symptom of withdrawal. That serves as a negative reinforcement for further use. You don't want to be sick, just like with cigarettes. People don't smoke because it feels good. They smoke because it makes them not feel bad. That can happen with marijuana, and individuals using it strictly to avoid the withdrawal syndrome associated with it. Let's see where else I want to go with this. There's been some suggestion. I was actually coming up to date on the literature on amotivational syndrome, and it's not really supported with rigorous scientific evidence. My experience in clinical populations with individuals smoking a lot of marijuana is they don't seem to want to do a lot of else in life. They fail to develop even in an early adult stage of development. They fail to thrive. They don't differentiate, move out into the world, start doing things, but tend to isolate, et cetera, et cetera. I think what the research has found is that is more a symptom of co-occurring depression or anxiety or other disorder than it is the effect of marijuana. I would see the marijuana, I would see the amotivation. I sort of link the two, but you really want to do a good diagnostic workup for other mental health issues. And look, oftentimes we want somebody to be clear of a substance before you try and diagnose something else. I think with marijuana, you want to try and start that be pretty aggressive with the pace of the diagnostic process for particularly depression. There's with the amotivational stuff, there's other drug use, there's personality traits, there's the co-occurring disorders. So it's hard to research and say that marijuana is responsible for that. It is associated with psychopathology. The book talks about a study in clinical trials for obesity, which resulted in a twofold increase in depression in the population studied when they started using marijuana for obesity. Subjects would discontinue the use. There was anxiety. There was perceived suicidal risks. Numerous large longitudinal studies suggest that cannabis increases the risk of schizophrenia, worsens symptoms, and is associated with poorer prognosis. Now, think of your gut reaction when I say that. No, that's not true. it's sort of in our culture that marijuana is not associated with mental illness. Look at the scientific research if you're going to come from an empirical place. If you're going to look at, your clinical studies with populations that are not opinions, that are not starting with a hypothesis that a researcher is looking to confirm, but you look at straight up clinical science, and there is quite an association between marijuana use and other major mental health disorders such as schizophrenia. Do your reading on that one. The relative addiction liability is fairly high. Marijuana is listed as a substance to which you can develop a use disorder. You can develop addiction to it. Largely because of the tolerance and the withdrawal, but also the impairment in your ability to function in life. Is a lot of research going into the therapeutic potential for the use of cannabinoids. It is useful for neurodegenerative disorders, obviously not useful for obesity. That study put the lid on that, like as an appetite suppressant or something. There were so many side effects. In a non-clinical population that was fairly well screened, the original research there is worth a peek. But at any rate, there's a lot of research going on that, but I think it's out. It's a little beyond where I can go in this lecture. Summing up, cannabinoids, marijuana, hash oil, etc., has been around for a long time. At least as long as alcohol. It has been used as a way of altering the mental state. It's a mood-altering, mind-altering substance. It does have a very high addiction potential. People use it. They want to use it more. They want to use it more. Eventually, they get sick if they stop using it, so they continue, and they'll present for treatment. It is almost always presenting with another substance. People who are taking benzodiazepines and smoking marijuana, opioid users smoking marijuana, people with alcohol use disorder smoking marijuana sometimes is a way to try to cut down on the alcohol because they think it impairs them less. Be sure to look at the bit in your chapter about psychomotor retardation or psychomotor impairment that you get from marijuana. It does slow your reaction time, etc. So marijuana, controversial drug, definitely one of concern for individuals who are going to practice in the field of addictions.